All right, everybody, welcome in. It is the first postseason edition of our little podcast. Yep, the 6-month journey, 6-month marathon that is the Major League Baseball season comes to an end. And obviously for the Rockies, it needed to end. And we'll get into that in a moment. But first, I want to thank my great sponsor, Steel. You know where to go, steelusa.com. That's STIHL. You can see it in the lower corner. And go shopping, man. It's fall. Get yourself prepared for leaves. Get yourself prepared for winter. So go to Steel, STIHL, steelusa.com. All kinds of supplies and the best tools in the business to help you get the job done and get the job done right. Huntington Bank, they're on every street corner in our great state, and they're going to take wonderful care of you in every facet of banking. If you're a student, you need to check them out. If you're looking to change banks, check them out. It's huntingtonbank.com, and you're going to learn quite a bit about why they've been so successful. Again, that's huntingtonbank.com. All right, let's get rolling. It is Wednesday morning, and literally about 40 minutes ago, the Rockies sent out a press release that Bill Schmidt had stepped down as general manager of the club. I think this was not unforeseen given the circumstances, not just of this year, an historically bad season for the Rockies. But you look at the last three, 103 losses, 101 losses, and then this year, 119 losses. And even though the several years prior to that, since 2018, the Rockies not only haven't been to the playoffs, but they've been below 500. So even those 4 years that preceded the 103 loss season were not good. And there's a myriad of reasons. We'll dabble into those. But, as you kind of put a postscript a little bit on this year, and, we talked about it quite a bit on the air or in areas at times on the air, the swing and miss, the chase rate, the high strikeout rate offensively, the disappointment defensively, especially in the first half of the season where the Rockies, with really good talent defensively, didn't play nearly up to the level that one would have expected. And then, from a pitching standpoint, that too was disappointing. You thought the Rockies, were going to be great by any stretch of the imagination, but with the return of a healthy German Marquez, a healthy Antonio Senzatella, their veteran presence would raise the bar a little bit. Chase Dolander entering the fray with his, great stuff on the right side. And we know that didn't take place. In fact, some, housekeeping things for you, final notes, final stats, because we had to live through it, and you great fans had to live through it as well if you hung in there. The ERA from a starter standpoint was the highest in the modern era. It was a 6.66. Your starting pitching produced a 6.66 earned run average. No team had ever done that in the history of the game. And that includes previous Rockies teams. And we know they pitch at altitude. We know the ERA is going to be higher, but no team had approached that. From an offensive standpoint, the Rockies, with the benefit of playing 81 games at Coors Field at altitude, finished with the fewest runs in the sport by 50. By 50. That, I don't even have words to describe that. I don't know how that occurs. And then we talked about defense. The Rockies ended up with 110 errors. The only team that had more errors in the big leagues this year was the Boston Red Sox. They somehow were able to overcome that and get to the postseason. So in every facet of the sport, offense, defense, pitching, the Rockies not only were below optimum level, but they were basically dead last. And when you look at all of that, there's got to be a compilation of reasons. So starting with what occurred earlier today, Billy Schmidt stepping down and moving aside. And the other thing that came out of it was that the Rockies would do an external, and those words I'm sure didn't enter into the press release by accident. They're going to do an external search for the next, I don't know if they'll call him because it's in vogue now, instead of general manager, VP of baseball operations. Will they hire somebody beneath that? What kind of autonomy, and this is really important, what kind of autonomy will that person have? Not only from a financial standpoint, but to overlook and do a deep dive into every area of the organization. This is where I applaud, and I know you folks don't know this individual yet, and I know that in reality, because of what has occurred lately, there's been a lot of vitriol sent in the direction of the principal owner, Dick Monfort. And Dick's son, Walker, who is a really bright guy and a really hardworking guy, and people might not want to hear that because of the last name, but Walker wants to do this differently. I think Walker realizes and recognizes that clearly the way things have been going now for a number of years has not produced anywhere close to the results they want. In fact, it's produced horrendous results, as we just witnessed. And I think he understands that you need ideas that are fresh and new from outside the organization. And for that reason, it's going to be imperative that that individual is able to bring in his own team of people and look, and because there's a lot of quality people within the Rockies organization. There's a lot of talented people within the Rockies organization. So I know for the average fan, it's like clean house, wipe everybody out. They do need a new direction without question. I mean, there's no question about that, and they understand that. And I think today was the first step. But whoever that top individual ends up being, they're going to have the autonomy to start to build it their way and the wherewithal to be able to build it their way. And it's really the first time that the Rockies from that position have gone outside the organization since 1999, when Dan O'Dowd was hired out of the Cleveland then Indians organization. So I do think you are going to see some wholesale changes up top, and it's going to be interesting to watch this thing unfold. And miracles are not going to occur. It's not like next year automatically the Rockies are going to flip this around and become a playoff team. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I'm not going to throw out a million names in terms of candidates to be the next general manager. We'll call it general manager right now. I am going to talk about one, but the reason I'm not going to talk about a myriad of people is because this is a really coveted job, not just because it's one of 30. Obviously, that is the case. But I'm telling you, there are so many bright individuals in baseball that have always looked at the Rockies' job as a Rubik's Cube. And those that are the best and the brightest in this business like challenges. It probably doesn't matter what business it is. People who are really driven like challenges. They like new challenges. So the whole altitude deal and the whole situation with the Rockies historically, where going from home to road causes all kinds of problems, not only physically, but we know in the offensive numbers. The Rockies can be the best team in baseball at home and be miserable out on the road. The pitching issues at altitude versus the pitching issues then going out on the road. There are a great number of highly qualified, well-respected, well-decorated front office types that don't look at this job as, oh my God, I would never want to go there. They look at it the opposite way. In fact, I will give you a case in point. Andrew Friedman, who ran the Tampa Bay operation for so long and then was pulled to the Dodgers a number of years ago and paid a crazy amount of money to run the Dodgers organization. He's as well thought of an executive in baseball since Theo Epstein. Andrew Friedman. I talked to him this year, and I had asked him, because Ryan Spilborghs, my partner, had told me this a couple of years ago, that Andrew Friedman had always looked at the Rockies as like a dream kind of job. So I happened to ask him one day around the batting cage if that were the case. And he looked at me and said, absolutely. He goes, if I had, the authority to do the things I wanted to do, and certainly the money to do the things that he wants to do, he goes, that would be my dream job. And this is why he's sitting there operating the LA Dodgers, who year in and year out win the division, and year in and year out are picked to win a World Series, of which they've won a couple in the last few years, one during the shortened season of 2020, and then obviously last year. He's sitting there in the catbird seat, and he's looking at the challenges of running the Rockies with altitude as a huge, huge factor, saying that would be his dream job. So I point that out to tell you there's not going to be a short list of highly qualified and interesting candidates. It's going to be a long list. The one name I wanted to bring up is somebody I know a little bit from his days in the Rockies organization. And then don't get freaked out by that, because then you're saying, oh, see, they're just going to hire somebody from within. This person hasn't been with the Rockies in 20 years. Thad Levine. He left the Rockies when he got an opportunity to be the assistant general manager for the Texas Rangers. It was at that point in time a promotion. He was working under Dan O'Dowd in the Rockies front office. And then he eventually became the vice president of baseball operations for the Minnesota Twins. The Twins were really successful. He's been on the sideline for the last year or so, and I know that this is a job that he covets. And we'll see where it goes and how this thing plays out. But the point I wanted to get across to all of you is that there's going to be no shortage of really interesting and outstanding candidates. And I think it was really important that the Rockies said we are looking externally, as opposed to, and we know this in the past, a lot of times they've just gone down the hall to the next person they felt was qualified. They did it when Dan O'Dowd left with Jeff Bridich. They did it ultimately with Billy Schmidt when Jeff Bridich in the spring several years ago decided to step away. This time they're going to go outside the organization. And this is a big, big hill to climb, because the Rockies are at the worst place they have ever been. And, I just enumerated some of the stats. And you say, well, how did they get to this point? And it's why one of the answers to that is why you have to look at every aspect of the organization. Knowing full well, and I know you may not believe this, there are a lot of good people there. There really are. There's a lot of talented people. But overall, this group, for whatever reason, has come up short in the acquisition of talent. They have not drafted well over the last 15 years. In fact, by WAR, wins above replacement, baseball reference WAR, the Rockies are last of 30 teams in the last 15 years of the draft. And that doesn't just mean the first round, that means other, all the way down through every pick that was made. So that is probably position one where you go, okay, whatever we've been doing in that regard has not borne fruit. It's not to say you're going to be number one, but you got to be somewhere where you're producing more talent than they have. Because at the end of the day, and I remember this, fielding this quite a bit when Bud Black was still the manager. People were like, you got to fire Buddy Black. Well, the Rockies ultimately did, right? They fired Buddy in May. And I love Warren Schaefer, and I'm very fond of Bud Black, who's been a good manager and a well-respected manager for a number of years between the Padres and the Rockies. And the first 2 years with the Rockies, they went to the postseason. I've said this, and I'll say it till I'm blue in my face. Talent wins, especially in baseball. You have to have the players. And so Number one, there's been a huge shortage of talent over the last few years. And so you have to delve into that as the new leader of baseball operations. What have we been doing and what have we not been doing in player selection when it comes to the draft? Number two, same thing. You look at, Latin America. Now, there's been some wins. Ezequiel Tovar came out of, Latin America. Juan Mejia, I think, is going to be a nice piece in the bullpen, obviously, out of Latin America. But you got to look at every area. You got to look at every area because at the end of the day, it still comes down to talent. And then because you're in this situation where you're so far down, nothing is off limits. Nothing is off limits when it comes to trade. Nothing is off limits when it comes to ideas. So you look at this club, and I mean nothing's off limits. If you can trade a player that you think is a really good young player, but get more back in return in your assessment, you have to look at doing that. Because at the end of the day, and I love Brenton Doyle and I love Ezequiel Tovar. I know Tovar's year wasn't as good nearly as last year, and he missed significant chunks of time with injury, and I think that's, big reason why, but he's only 24. Doyle's a little bit older. He'll be 28 next season. Hunter Goodman's 25. He had a spectacular year. But the bottom line is you have to acquire more talent. So you have to look at every avenue possible to acquire talent. That's the draft. That's signing of international free agents. And that's free agency and making trades. So nothing should be off the table, to turn this around and get it headed in the direction that we all want to see. But step one, occurred today, and I applaud the organization saying, hey, we're gonna look for an external candidate. It's not, again, to say that there aren't sharp people inside those walls, because I believe there are in a lot of different areas, not just on the baseball operations side. I think, for instance, the Rockies PR staff is number one in baseball. They're right there near the top. They're terrific. They really are. There's other areas that I think they have individuals that excel in. But you have to keep adding talent. You have to add talent internally, and obviously you have to add talent ultimately on the field, and you want fresh ideas. And I think that's one of the things that Walker Monfort, stated today in that press release that went out mid-morning. Looking at, some other things briefly with the team, starting in the outfield. You saw, for the most part, Jordan Beck in left field, Brenton Doyle naturally in center field. You saw a combination, Tyler Freeman in right, Mickey Moniak in right, a little bit of Yanquiel Fernandez in right. It's a group that you hope to see grow, especially with Jordan Beck. Jordan Beck, I think, ended with 16 home runs, and most of his home runs came in like a flourish. He had like 4 or 5 in that Kansas City series, it seemed like, and then 4 or 5 more at one point in the season. You'd like to see more extended consistency, and fingers crossed you hope to get that. Plus, you hope 16 turns into, honestly, 25 or 30, but you don't know until it happens. He's still young in terms of service time, but this year hopefully will be a harbinger of a significant jump next year. But we said the same thing about Michael Toglia a year ago, and I'm going to raise my hand here. I thought Michael Toglia, based on what we saw the final 3-4 months of 2024, I thought he was going to be a star. I thought he was going to be a 35 home run slugging first baseman who played great defense. And I still have the high hopes that one day it works out for Michael in that regard. But we know this year was a disaster for him. He struck out about 40% of the time. He finished in the minor leagues. Nobody saw that coming. So you got to do it. And then Jordan Beck realizes you got to do it over 162 games and keep on growing. Brenton Doyle, I thought by and large, I know he scuffled a little bit toward the end of the season. The second half was much better offensively. It more resembled what we saw in year 2. The defense remains outstanding. He won't win a Gold Glove this year after winning in his first 2 years. I think Pete Crow Armstrong will end up winning it in the National League. And then in right, one of the few good stories for the Rockies individually, both were in right field. Tyler Freeman, his bat-to-ball skills, the Rockies need more of that. Nobody can go through another season of seeing the strikeout and the chase rate the worst in baseball. Can't happen. That's why they had the fewest runs in baseball. You can't have a lineup of 9 Tyler Freemans, but you can't have just one Tyler Freeman in the lineup. But Tyler was, a plus, certainly. Mickey Moniak, big plus. Mickey Moniak was let go by the Angels. Give the Rockies credit. They jumped on Moniak, and he responded with the best year of his career. He ended up with 24 home runs. He had a mid, well above 800 or mid 800 OPS. He gets dinged a little bit for his defense. I don't trust all the defensive metrics. Mickey's a good athlete. He can run a little bit. And he's more of a platoon guy, much better against righties, certainly, than lefties. But Mickey had 24 home runs. And Mickey and Tyler Freeman were pluses in what, as we know, was a dark season. On the infield, at third base, Kyle Karros came up and played a lot the final, whatever it was, 5-6 weeks of the season. Showed some promise, showed some bat-to-ball skills, really good defensively. And we'll see how he progresses from a power spot, because typically, as you know, corner infield spots, corner outfield spots have to hit with power. And you'd like to see that at Coors Field, naturally. Right? So we'll see. He's still a young player. Ezequiel Tovar, a year ago, Tovar had 26 home runs and 45 doubles. He was second in the National League in extra base hits to Shohei Ohtani. Most fans around baseball wouldn't know that. They'd say, oh, Shohei, yeah, obviously. Who was second? I mean, they picked Schwarber, you'd pick, Bryce Harper. There's a bunch of names you'd come up with before Ezequiel Tovar. That's how good he was offensively in 24. Now, he was affected by a number of injuries in 25. I think Ezekiel's always going to have a fair strikeout rate because he does chase a lot. He's super aggressive. But he also does damage. So you like to massage that a little bit. I think he has a nice bounce-back season in 26. I don't know. We could be doing this show 5 years from now and say, offensively, Ezequiel Tovar's best year was that sophomore season when he hit 26 home runs and 45 doubles. It doesn't always just ascend because you want it to ascend and you look at their age. But overall, with his defensive ability and the ability to find barrels, and he's strong, he can hit the ball out to all fields, I look for a much better and more complete season again in 26 for Tovar. Second base, kind of wide open. Ryan Ritter did some decent things. I thought he played really good defensively. Didn't show the power yet in his first couple of months in the big leagues that he demonstrated, certainly in Albuquerque this year. So he's another guy that's in the mix in a position that'll be wide open. First base, we kind of touched on late in the year. Blaine Krim came up, and he was a lot of fun. Final couple of weeks of the season, I think he hit in all but 2 ball games, hit 5 home runs. A journeyman minor leaguer at 28 got an opportunity, and credit to him because he took advantage of it. But, that's a position that we saw Warming Bernabel come up and do great things. He was a player of the week in the National League in his first week in the big leagues, but you just don't know. It's not enough of a body of work where you can go, okay, man, that's our guy at first base. I'll use Bryce Harper again. Philly knows who their first baseman is because once you've done it and established yourself to doing it year after year, you truly know what you have. And the Rockies don't yet. I think behind the plate, they believe they have, a real offensive stud and a guy that made a lot of progress defensively in Hunter Goodman. He was the other big positive clearly to the season. And if you look at his numbers, short of Cal Raleigh, whose numbers as a catcher were off the charts with the 60 home runs, you look at his numbers, especially offensively, and they are better than virtually anybody else, maybe short of Shea Langoliers, who had similar numbers with the A's. Will Smith, who got hurt late, has the high OPS because he walks a lot. But the team MVP without question was Hunter Goodman. So that's a little synopsis of what you have right now. And I may have left a couple people out going in offensively to next spring. You have to get better. You have to hope some of those guys continue to rise, but you also have to get better, as we talked about earlier, through talent acquisition. On the pitching side, starting pitching, which I thought was going to be better this year and clearly was not. Next year, Chase Dollander, really good on the road, did not handle Coors Field. The stuff is off the charts, outstanding. What did he learn in year one? He's a bright guy. He's an astute guy. He's a hardworking guy. You hope that he can take it and move forward, because he truly, and there's not a lot of guys that you say this about, has top of the rotation stuff. There are other guys who go big league pitcher, but he's really got to outthink the opposition, has to have great command, has to really hit his spots. That for me is like Tanner Gordon. Tanner Gordon, who probably was the Rockies' overall best pitcher the last couple of months of the season. Kyle Freeland also pitched well in the second half for the most part. But those guys are more back of the rotation guys. So who can land at the front of the rotation? Well, as I mentioned, Dollander's one. McKay Brown only had 7 starts. The one that I hold on to, and you do as Rockies fans, was the start in Seattle, where against that very formidable lineup, he struck out 10 in 5 innings. He allowed only 2 hits. I mean, he looked like a high-end ace. I mean, he looked like Hunter Green when he was on, short of the 101. But he was working at 96, 97 throughout that ball game. So what does he take into the offseason? Because his minor league numbers suggest he can be a more middle, upper rotation guy. One of the wild cards with next year's potential rotations, Ryan Feltner. Ryan Feltner went down with some back issues in April, never pitched again. It was really a lost year for Feltner, who, again, it seems like a million years ago, but the second half of 2024 was one of the better pitchers in the National League, one of the better starting pitchers in the National League, and you hope that he would take that and run with it in 25. Injuries completely derailed his 25 season, so it's an unknown really going into 26. What is theirs? 3 quick names among minor leaguers that are close to having an opportunity in the big leagues. They'll be in spring training and big league camp with a chance to break with the club. Griffin Herring, who was picked up in the Ryan McMahon deal. He made, by the way, the top prospect list, and it's a very short list. This one for minor league baseball. It's basically players of the year. Well, he was one of the starting pitchers. That's how dominant he was between the Yankees organization and the Rockies organization. Left-handed starter, ton more strikeouts than innings pitch, few hits compared to innings pitch. So he's a real intriguing one, and hopefully the Rockies landed a big-time starting pitching talent for Ryan McMahon. Gabriel Hughes, former number 1, who had Tommy John surgery a couple of years ago. He was in Albuquerque this year. The velocity is not all the way back for Gabriel Hughes. He was effective, though, late in the season with Albuquerque. He'll be in spring training. You hope that, another 6 months removed from Tommy John, you're going to see good things from Gabriel Hughes. You keep your fingers crossed on that. And then there's another left-hander in Double-A who dominated from a number standpoint. The stuff, is not overwhelming. It's upper 80s fastball. And I'm talking about Sean Sullivan out of Wake Forest. But those are 3 names to keep in mind. But that's where the Rockies are right now as they look for a new head of baseball operations. And then you'll probably, once that's established, start hearing, where that individual is tinkering, et cetera, moving forward. But I do think this was a necessary, clearly, first step for the Rockies to realize that whatever they've been doing the last several years has not been working, and it culminated in one of the worst seasons, as we know. in baseball history. We're going to kick this around a little bit more probably next week with one of my partners, Ryan Spilborgs, and we'll get his thoughts on the direction now in the offseason of the Rockies. I do want to comment, as I always do, on football because I love football, and we're in the midst of the football season very quickly. Broncos got a very good win over the Cincinnati Bengals, a team at home especially that they should win. They should beat. And they did. And they did it in dominant fashion. They produced over 500 yards of offense. You never see that in the NFL. Bo Nix was efficient. Bo Nix was more on target this week than he certainly was the previous week. And the Broncos ran the football. Dobbins was over 100 yards. Harvey had some big runs. He had the walk-in touchdown on the flip in the flat in the second half. So there were a lot of really good things offensively that came out of that game, and defensively, the Broncos dominated the Cincinnati Bengals. Gets a whole lot tougher this week. We learn, as we like to say in sports, especially in football, we learn a lot more when the Broncos go to Philadelphia. They take on Uncle Vic and his defense and a more formidable opponent in the Eagles, but they're ready. They're ready for that. They're ready for that challenge, and it's on to London. So it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks for the Broncos. But kudos, they played well and did what was necessary, winning in, I think, dominant fashion over a Bengals team that's missing Joe Burrow and defensively is not a good football team. University of Colorado. I'll keep this short and sweet. Got off to the great start against BYU, but when are they going to finish? When are they going to win a quote unquote bigger game? Hasn't happened yet. It really hasn't. And they haven't managed timeouts well. We talked about that last week, but that was a winnable game against a quality opponent, top 25 opponent. And they were doing a lot of things right, but they still ended up losing the football game, and that's the bottom line. Up in Fort Collins, it's a disgrace right now. I know I talked about this last week. They scored 3 points against a Wazoo team, a Washington State Cougars team, that in the previous 2 weeks had given up 59 points in each outing, including 59 points to North Texas. CSU at home scored 3 points. They made the quarterback change. They scored 3 points. I don't get this. I mean, what is the offensive identity 4 years in with this Colorado State team? And I'm repeating some of the things I've said in the past, not only last week, but really more last year. They were going to be an air raid team. They were going to throw the football all over the lot, the big, tall wide receivers. And you'd think that would bring in a lot of quarterback candidates. Man, I can get to the NFL. A program like CSU, they're going to throw it all the time. That's appealing. And we don't see great talent there. We don't see points being scored. They kind of run the ball and, punt quite a bit. Good place to go if you're a punter right now. And, Jay Norvell, I was thinking about this. I'm a Giant fan. And the last chip that Brian Daboll had to play to probably keep his job, save his job at the conclusion of this season was to play Jackson Dart. Russell Wilson went to the bench. He played Jackson Dart. And for 1 week, Brian Daboll was all smiles. Brian Daboll was hugging up on Jackson Dart because they upset the Los Angeles Chargers at home. Dart ran for a touchdown, threw for a touchdown, and played with great energy. And for 1 week, Giant fans were like, okay, that's the one chip. The reason I'm making this analogy is that's the one chip that Brian Daboll had to play to potentially save his job at the end of the year. For Jay Norvell, I guess his last chip was to pass the play calling duties off to Coach Mummy, who is the son of the orchestrator of the air raid offense. But I feel your pain, Ram fans, because this has been awful. And the facilities are there. The ambition is there. I mean, think about CSU. We want to go to the Big 12. We're going to do everything we can to go to the Big 12. That didn't work out. So now the Pac-12, which has the pedigree from a standpoint of branding. It's not the Pac-12 that had SC and Oregon and UCLA and Arizona. It's not that Pac-12. We know that. It's a whole new Pac-12, but it does have the name recognition. So they're always thinking larger. And a lot of their other sports have measured up. Women's volleyball, we know men's basketball, and I think it's going to, Farak Minash, the new coach, it's going to continue on there. By all indications, they've recruited really well. The other sports programs are holding their weight. The most important sports program is not. And I don't understand it, because everything's in place for them to be one of the best group of 5 teams. And it hasn't happened. And I've said this before. I was a big Jay Norvell fan going in. I thought it was a great hire. Hasn't worked out. And unless something miraculous happens over the next, 7-8 weeks, they're going to be looking for a new coach once again. I will leave you on this. I didn't get to catch a lot of the Ryder Cup because the baseball season was concluding for the Rockies in San Francisco, and we were on opposite of the Ryder Cup coverage. Like all of you, whether it be on social media or just watching highlights, I saw what transpired. Yes, the U.S. made a great run in singles on Sunday, but the Euros went to Bethpage Black, and they captured the Ryder Cup. And you know what? My biggest takeaway is I was embarrassed by, and I know the old line when we were in school, like a few can ruin it for the larger group, and hopefully it was just a few who ruined it, but the fan behavior leapt across the line. Didn't just cross a line. It leapt across a line. And I know the Ryder Cup audience for golf is different than it typically is at your average PGA event, even your major. Decorum is what golf is all about. Being a gentleman is what it's all about, right? How you conduct yourself, how you comport yourself. If you call a penalty on yourself, right? That's the essence of golf. Not do we look around and nobody saw me move the golf ball 6 inches so I had a better lie. No, that's not what happens in golf. And the same thing, you can have a crowd that is passionate. You can have a crowd that is rooting for the hometown, which is, in this case, the U.S. You can have all of that and not jump over that line where you're name calling, where you're making it uncomfortable or impossible for family members to watch their, in this case, husbands or significant others play the game. That was embarrassing. And it goes back to, a soapbox I've gotten on in the past. Just because you buy a friggin' ticket does not give you the right to say anything you want. It does not. Whether it's courtside at an NBA game or, box in the NFL, think of the people around you. And I'm not just talking about children, which should be number one. Let other people enjoy the game. You don't need to be swearing up and down. You don't need to be calling people out by, transgressions in their life or other horrible thoughts and language. It's terrible. There's no place for it. It makes everyone around the event who are trying to watch uncomfortable, and there's no place for it. So human beings out there, what have you accomplished? Yeah, the person who's yelling those things, what have you done? Have you ever been inside the ropes in any arena? Have you ever been the best in the world at whatever your vocation is? Probably not if you're the one barking like that. And again, There's a difference between rooting on your team with passion, trying to give a home field, home court, home golf course advantage, and jumping over the damn line. And that's what occurred at Bethpage Black. And I hope it was just a few and not many, but it was not a good look. And that's how I leave you on this, what is it? Last week of September, first week of October. Today's actually October 1st. So we'll do it again in a few days. We'll chart the progress of the Rockies in the search for a new leader of baseball operations. As I said, Spilly here in the coming days will join us, and other guests as well. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you always listening in. You all stay well, stay safe, and we'll do it again shortly. Take care.